In this video, we will be stitching with only one thread and sharing all the tips and tricks you'll need to go with it. Hi everyone, Marie here. Today I want to talk you through the tips on stitching with one thread, how to start the thread and how does it look on different counts. So let's dive in. I will be using Aida throughout the demonstration. If you are stitching on linen, the principles are exactly the same, but I would recommend watching our video called How to Start Stitching on Even Weave and Linen. I am linking it up here. I would recommend watching it as well. So first, the all-important thing, let's talk about starting the thread. Because there is no way to loop it, there's usually only two options really. Either you'll do a pin stitch or you'll do a little bit of a naughty knot at the end. To make a pin stitch, let's do it. So pierce the fabric in the middle of the stitch. That would be somewhere here. Or simply use the middle hole on your linen. That would be exactly the same spot. And leave a little tail. So I'll hold it like this. Come back through the top where your bottom stitch would normally be. So this leg, the pin stitch leg, would be your bottom leg. So if you start your bottom leg the other way around, it is important to sort of flip these instructions and adapt it to your style of stitching, okay? Right, so let's go back through the middle to create first half of our bottom stitch. I am sort of tightening it a bit while holding on to the tail. Come back up through the bottom hole and we'll go through the middle again. But what I want to say is extremely important here, that you pierce the other threads while going through. So sometimes I sort of run a little bit with my needle along the other leg and then I pierce through to make sure that I go through the thread. This is to anchor the pin stitch. If you go through sort of cleanly and don't pierce the thread, sometimes the pin stitch can unravel. That's why I'm just used to sort of tracing the top leg and piercing through, and I am quite certain that it has gone through. So now I'm going to pull quite fiercely. I am really pulling. I'm almost a bit scared that I'm going to snap it in half, and it's just not moving. It's not moving at all. This stitch is extremely safe, ladies and gents. So let me just clip it. Because we're just going to cover it. Now this looks teeny tiny because I am doing it on 14 count for demonstration purposes, but a little bit later on you will see that on other counts of fabric it actually looks much fuller. So this was one way of starting the thread. Let's talk about the naughty knot. So in general, to make a good stable knot, you would create a sort of a T out of your thread and the needle, and you're going to start looping and looping and looping and loop and another loop. Then what I do, I sort of push it down the middle. Then I cover it, I sort of scoop it and cover it with my thumb. And while I'm pinching it like this, I start pulling the needle through. When I do it, sometimes when I do it very tight, I have an issue coming through this part of the needle. So just be aware that sometimes you might need to let go of the pressure a little bit, and just go until the thread allows you. That is it, at which point I have got a knot on here. I have to add a big disclaimer here. Knots are not always reliable, as they will easily slip through fabric, and I'm going to show you. I don't think I've made a knot big enough. There you go. So I was actually putting a lot more pressure on the thread than on this one when testing the pin stitch, and the pin stitch did not move. Over here it's just a simple pull and it's out. And so for it to actually stay put, you'd have to have a pretty big knot, really quite a substantial knot. Which leads me to my second point. Big knots are always going to be visible and create bumps on your piece when you finish it. So it will sort of create bulges a little bit that are going to be visible when you go and finish it. So that's why knots are generally not very recommended. I do have a top secret tip I will share with you, however, but don't tell on me. Yeah, I know it's not correct per se to do this, but it's been working great for me. It's an easy way out, and I'm going to share it with you. So I have come up with a combination of the knot and the pin stitch method. So I make a quilter's knot, but I only use one, maximum 2 loops. Sometimes just one, depending on what I'm stitching on. You can see that it is a tiny knot, really quite unsubstantial. I have clipped the tail over here, right? You can still see the knot, and I will make the pin stitch exactly the same way, but I'm not coming through the top and holding the tail, but I'm coming through the bottom. So I am gonna, my fabric is a bit stiff. Okay, so you can see my little knot is secure through the center of the fabric. I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm again tracing the upper leg, and I am making sure that I am piercing the thread when pulling through. And this is my cheeky workaround pin stitch. You have a worry-free pin stitch that will hold extremely well, and also only a teeny tiny knot at the back that does not stand out in any way. So here you go, my top stitching secret for starting one thread is revealed, but please don't tell on me because it is a bit cheeky. However, if it works for you, as I say, if it works for you, it's, you know, it's okay to use. I don't think there's any right or wrong way, just best practice. Now let's talk about where is it suitable to stitch with one thread only. It's all about the fabric count. So generally speaking, 14 count and 16 count, or the linen equivalent of 28 and 32 count, should be stitched with 2 threads. That is because the resulting crosses are larger and the thread needs to cover a larger area of fabric. 18 and 36 count will forever be a battle of 1 or 2 threads, and it depends entirely on your personal aesthetic preference. And 20 count and 40 count, 20 count is aida and 40 count is the equivalent in linen. they are highly recommended to be stitched with one thread only. So 40 count and higher or 20 count aida, one thread only. This is because the weave is so fine that you would honestly quite struggle getting 2 strands through. Let me show you how some of it looks on actual projects. So first, this is a couple of motifs from the Touch of Magic stitch along that we released this year, and part of it is stitched on 32 count. Okay, the fabric is 32 count. That means an equivalent of 16 count aida. And I have stitched the cat in 2 strands of floss, so you can see the coverage is quite dense. The season is also stitched in 2 strands, but all the letters are stitched in 1 strand of floss only, and the pumpkin as well. So you can see a prime example on the different effect created by 2 stranded stitching and 1 stranded stitching in the same project. This is just 32 count, and I personally quite like the finish with 1 thread. You can see the fabric through a little bit. So for me, the thing about 1 thread is just getting used to it aesthetically. Like, you need to get your eyes sort of used to it, and then it's absolutely fine, and you can then use it to achieve different effects in your project, and you can sort of have a bit of a play around with 2 and 1 strands. This is a project stitched on 40 count. It is with 1 thread only, of course, and I just wanted to show you the resulting coverage. A lot of people think that stitching just with 1 strand will not give you a sufficient coverage, but you can see over here on the 40 count, which is an equivalent of 20 count aida, you actually can hardly see the fabric through. The coverage is superb, and it looks quite all right, I think. And this is our How Does Your Garden Grow cell. I am stitching it on 20 count aida, and I started stitching it at a point where I was actively avoiding stitching just with 1 thread, because it was part of my learning journey, and I just thought that having, stitching with 2 strands would be better. But if you look carefully, I can see how some of the stitches are distorted, some of them started bulging up. It's simply too much of floss for a small area of sort of dense fabric, and if this was a full coverage piece, this would look absolutely horrible. It would literally be 1 bump after another of the thread just trying to, sort of coexist on the dense fabric. If I show you side by side the neatness of the 1 strand on 40 count and the sort of messiness of the 2 strands of 20 count, those are exactly the same size stitches. For 20 count and 40 count are same. It's just that the 40 count has got more holes, but the resulting the result is exactly the same because I'm stitching every other hole. So you can see, I can see that this is a lot neater than this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a quick demonstration on how would it look if I continued stitching this on in one thread, and share some more tips with you. Tip number 1, needle size. When stitching with 1 thread, make sure you use a smaller needle. The standard cross stitch size for 14 count Aida, which is a size needle 24, is really a bit too big for one strand, and it would come undone constantly. So I would recommend to stitch with size 28 when possible, or the biggest size that I would personally recommend is needle size 26. Tip number 2, adapting patterns. When your pattern calls for example, 14 count Aida and stitching with 2 strands, and you want to adapt it to 20 count Aida and stitch with just 1 strand, always double check whether there are any specialty stitches or anything that would affect the final look. So for example, Dimensions is a company that creates kits that is based on the final effect of mixing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strands, and it works specifically with the count of fabric that they call for. Make sure that when you are changing the count of fabric, it will not affect the final look of the piece. All caterpillar cross stitch patterns only contain full crosses, which make them an absolutely perfect example of patterns that are very, very easily adapted to higher or lower counts based on simply your own personal preference, and you don't need to check anything beforehand. You can just pick your count, the desired number of threads that you want to stitch with, and just start stitching. Tip number 3, don't be scared to give it a go. All of us have had to get used to the look of just 1 strand on a fabric. I used to be very keen on extreme full coverage and extreme fullness of stitches. But the more I stitch with just 1 thread, the more I like it. So it is just about getting used to the look of it. The massive, massive big bonus of stitching with just 1 thread is the fact that it saves your thread significantly. So just the fact that you're stitching with 1 thread uses only 1/2 of the thread that you would normally need. And if you're stitching on a higher count fabric, your stitches are smaller, which even further reduces the amount of floss you're going to need to finish the project. Tip number 4, if you're not sure you're going to like it, don't start stitching on a big, huge project that you have been wanting to stitch for years. Pick something small, even just one little motif from a stitch along that you have been working on, just to give it a go on a small piece of fabric to find out whether that is actually your jam, whether you like stitching with just 1 thread, or whether that's something that you might not want to pursue. As always, if you liked this video, if you've learned something, please consider subscribing if you're not a subscriber already, and hit that notification bell so that you are notified when we next release our tutorial, which is every Monday at 7 p.m. GMT. If you give this video a like, we will know we're on the right track, and we will keep on releasing more tutorials like this, so any like will be very much appreciated. We'd love to see you stitch with just 1 strand, so don't hesitate and tag us on Instagram or Facebook, or post it in our 16,000 members strong Facebook group so that we can see your wonderful stitching. If you'd like this How Does Your Garden Grow stitch along, it is available as a full pattern, a one-time download on our website, caterpillarcrossstitch.com. And if you subscribe to our newsletter, you'll get a 10% discount for your first order and 8 free patterns delivered instantly into your email. If you have any questions or any additional tips for stitching with just 1 strand, please let us know in the comments. We would love to know. We love to have a chat with you. And that is it from us at Caterpillar Cross Stitch this week. Thank you so much for watching and supporting our channel, and we'll see you next week.